The night the desert held its breath. September 17th, 1942, 02:13 a.m. near Sidi Hanish airfield, Western Desert, Egypt. The moon was nothing more than a thin silver scratch across the North African sky. The desert lay still, a vast ocean of black dunes and cold sand whispering under the weight of a relentless wind. Far ahead, beyond a low ridge of jagged rock, the faint yellow glow of floodlights pulsed across the German-occupied airfield. Trucks growled, mechanics clanged tools against metal. Luftwaffe sentries paced along a perimeter of barbed wire and steel stakes. And between that airfield and the ridge lay the minefield, a deadly chessboard of pressure plates, tripwires, and glass mines buried flush beneath the sand. It was impossible terrain, impenetrable, designed to kill anything that dared cross it. Anything except the men moving silently across the dune crest. They were 12 in number, gaunt, sunburnt, wrapped in dusty scarves and blackened kit, members of the Special Air Service under Captain Arthur Lasher, a man whose calm eyes hid a streak of audacity bordering on madness. Each commando carried a canvas satchel with fuses, magnets, and plastic explosives. Their boots were wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Their faces were smeared with soot. But their most important tools were the ones in their hands. Thin metal rods, no thicker than knitting needles. The SAS called them whispers. Lasher raised one gloved hand. The team froze. Wind kicked grip across their boots. No one spoke. Not even a breath escaped louder than a whisper. He pointed toward a dark valley leading into the mine belt, an area German engineers believed was too exposed to flank attacks, so they had fortified it heavily. Perfect, Lasher thought. If the enemy thinks it's protected, that's where we go. Corporal Ewan Price, the team's wiry sapper, lay flat on his stomach and pressed one whisper rod gently into the sand. He felt for vibration, for hollow pockets, for the wrong kind of resistance. His fingers barely moved. His face never changed. He slid the rod out, moved forward 12 inches, pressed again. A ritual of life and death, a rhythm only SAS men understood. Behind them, Sergeant John Hook Dennett scanned the ridge through night vision goggles fashioned from a captured Italian periscope. In the distance, he saw German sentries smoking near their watchtower, bored, convinced no one in their right mind would challenge the desert's teeth. Lasher signaled with 2 fingers. Advance, single file, zero noise. The men moved, not walking, gliding. Every step followed a pattern. Left foot soft, heel to toe. Pause, right foot shift, weight on outer edge, hold. A dance choreographed by death itself. Minutes felt like hours. The desert swallowed time. At one point, Price stopped abruptly and raised his clenched fist. Everyone froze. No sound, no breath. He pressed the whisper rod again, harder, deeper. Click! He found it. A small circular pressure plate buried 6 inches below. One wrong step tonight and the entire mission, the entire team, would vanish in a cloud of sand and fire. Price dusted the sand gently with his fingers until the shape of the mine faintly emerged. He tapped twice on its casing, the signal for avoid. The line adjusted course by inches. The wind sighed. The desert watched. The SAS moved like shadows gliding across the moonless sea. After 20 more minutes, Lasher raised a closed fist. The team knelt. Ahead of them, the minefield thinned. Beyond that, the perimeter fence. 2 sentries smoking. 1 machine gun nest. They were close. Too close. One mistake now would expose the entire infiltration. Lasher leaned toward Price. He whispered, "How's it look?" Price inspected the ground one last time, sweeping sand aside with the back of his hand. He breathed. "Clear after 10 yards. Then we're through." Lasher nodded. To the men behind him, he signaled with 2 slow hand gestures. "Prepare to breach. Move like ghosts." And so they did. September 17th, 1942, 02:41 a.m., German perimeter fence, Sidi Hanesh. The last line of mines faded beneath the sand, leaving only wind-sculpted ridges between the SAS team and the barbed wire perimeter. The fence stretched across the landscape like a rib cage, rusted steel posts, tangled wire, and scraps of tin that clattered softly whenever the wind shifted. Beyond it, the low growl of generator engines rolled through the air. Captain Lasher crouched behind a limestone outcrop, studying the rhythm of the guards. 2 sentries patrolled in opposite directions, meeting every 90 seconds beneath a watchtower dimly lit by a single bulb. The pattern was predictable, lazy, and perfect for exploitation. He tapped Sergeant Hook Dennett's shoulder. "Window, 10 seconds. Hook nodded, reached into his pack, and withdrew a small pair of wire cutters wrapped in cloth. Every movement was slow, deliberate. If the cutters clicked too loudly, if a guard turned too soon, if one scrap of metal fell wrong, they'd be dead men. A gust of wind rattled the fence. Lasher made the gesture. "Go." Hook glided forward, boots wrapped in cloth, knees bent. He reached the wire, pressed it with his palm, felt the vibration. Satisfied, he slid the cutters beneath the lower strand. Snip, soft as a sigh. Snip, another strand severed. He peeled the opening upward, holding the wire apart with gloved hands, while Corporal Ewan Price slipped beneath, followed by the rest of the team. Their silhouettes vanished into the shadow of a nearby fuel drum stack. Lasher passed through last, gently lowering the wire into place as if it had never been touched. 10 seconds later, the 2 German sentries met beneath the watchtower. One exhaled a long plume of cigarette smoke. The other nudged the sand with his boot. "Wind's shifting," he grumbled. "Everything here is cursed," the other replied. They turned away, never realizing that 12 armed commandos now crouched a few meters behind them. The SAS didn't breathe until the guards disappeared into the darkness. Lasher leaned close to the team. "Targets confirmed. We cripple the runway, fuel, and aircraft. No gunfire unless necessary. Silent in, silent out." The men nodded. They knew the stakes. This airfield had launched nightly raids against British desert positions, bombers taking off under the cover of darkness to hammer long-range patrols and forward bases. Destroying it tonight meant saving hundreds of Allied lives and leaving the Germans scrambling to figure out how enemy commandos had crossed an impenetrable minefield. The humiliation alone would be worth it. 02:54 a.m. Inside the airfield perimeter.
The Commandos split into pairs, weaving between fuel trucks and repair tents. The desert wind carried the smell of petrol and engine oil. Floodlights cast pale yellow halos on Messerschmitts parked wing to wing along the edge of the runway, their noses covered, their canopies glinting. Price and Hook crept toward the northern fuel dump, a cluster of steel drums stacked beside a sandbag wall. Hook removed a block of plastic explosive and pressed it between two drums. Price inserted a fuse. 2 minutes, Price whispered. 2 minutes, Hook answered. They moved on. Private Tommy Orford and Lance Corporal Reese Beddos approached an aircraft revetment. A Bf-110 sat in the center, its engines still warm. A mechanic's jacket lay on the wing, abandoned mid-job. Orford slipped beneath the fuselage, planting a shaped charge on the starboard engine. "Beautiful," he whispered. "Savor it later," Beddos muttered. Lasher and 2 others slipped toward the control hut. No explosives this time, just a thin coil of steel wire. Lasher looped it around the radio tower's supporting beam and attached a tension device. When detonated, the wire would snap taut and slice through the structure like a piano string, toppling the antenna and leaving the Germans deaf in the chaos. Inside the hut, 2 Luftwaffe officers argued over fuel shortages. One slammed a clipboard on the table. Lasher listened, counted their voices, calculated their positions. But this wasn't the mission. No unnecessary kills. Not tonight. He guided his men back into the shadows. 03:06 a.m. on the runway. Corporal Price signaled again, a closed fist and extended thumb. 1 minute to detonation. The Commandos regrouped behind a maintenance truck, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Lasher raised his wrist, checking the luminous dial on his watch. 30 seconds, he whispered. Wind stirred the sand. A distant generator rattled. A German sentry yawned. Silence stretched, thin as wire. 10 seconds. The men crouched low, weapons ready. The desert seemed to inhale. 5, 4, 3, 2. When a faint metallic ting echoed from the minefield behind them. Lasher's eyes snapped open. Price stiffened. Hook pressed his back against the truck. The sound was unmistakable. A vibrating rod. Not theirs. A German patrol, probing the mine belt. Someone was coming. Now, right as the charges were about to go off. Lasher hissed through his teeth. We hold. No sound, no movement. Then, in the span of a heartbeat, boom! The northern fuel dump erupted in a column of fire. Boom! The aircraft revetments went up, blasting shards of metal across the night. Boom! The runway cracked as explosives tore through its surface. Sirens ripped the air. Flak gunners shouted. Floodlights swung wildly. German sentries scrambled in panic. And through the chaos, a dozen shadows melted into the dark, as if vanishing into the sand. The Germans screamed in confusion. How did they get in? Where did they come from? Minefield is intact. No breaches. Lasher heard it all as he and his men drifted back toward the ridge, silent as ghosts. They had minutes before German patrols swept the mine belt. Minutes before the desert turned deadly again.
The minefield that belonged to them. September 17th, 1942, 03:11 a.m., Sidi Hanish wine belt. The desert was no longer quiet. The ground vibrated with German boots, shouted orders, and the distant crackle of burning aircraft. Searchlights stabbed across the dunes like white blades, slicing through smoke and drifting sand. Lasher raised his hand. His men halted instantly, dropping low, forming a tight column. In the darkness, their outlines blurred into the dunes. Ahead lay the minefield, now lit by panicked German flares arcing overhead. In their cold blue glow, the sand looked like frozen waves, the mines invisible beneath them. And behind the SAS team? Chaos. Explosions still rolled through the airfield. A burning Messerschmitt slid along the runway, its canopy melting like wax. German voices rose in frantic tones. "Saboteure! Sie sind hier außen! Find them!" Lasher leaned close to Corporal Price. "We walked the same path," he whispered. "Exactly the same." Price nodded, swallowing hard. He knew the drill, but this time, if they drifted even a hand's width off the untouched corridor through the minefield, they'd be vaporized. The minefield wasn't just an obstacle. It was a living thing. One wrong vibration, and it would breathe fire. 03:13 a.m. Entry point. Price lowered himself onto his stomach, whisper rod between his teeth. He brushed sand aside with quiet circular motions. The faint groove made earlier, the indentation from their inbound crawl, still lingered, barely, just enough. He pressed the rod in. Soft, clear, safe. He slid forward, tapped twice, the signal for the man behind him. The SAS file began to move, one at a time, like beads sliding along an invisible thread. Every step was measured, every shift of weight deliberate. Even their breathing slowed, trained for moments like this. Behind them, a German jeep roared to life. Lights swept the desert. A machine gun rattled warnings into the air. Lasher whispered harshly, "Stay low, stay silent." The men obeyed. The desert held its breath. 03:17. They advanced 3 yards, 10 yards, 15. Then Price stopped suddenly. His hand lifted. Open palm. Freeze. Lasher's pulse hammered. "What is it?" Price angled the whisper rod down, tapped gently. Tick, tick, tick. A glass mine. Shallow. Deadly. It hadn't been there on the way in, meaning only one thing. German engineers were resetting mines after the explosions. The entire pattern was shifting. Lasher clenched his jaw. "We'll bypass. How long?" Price scanned. He probed the sand with quick, precise motions, a surgeon working blind. 30 seconds, he breathed. "No more." Hook hissed. "We don't have 30 seconds! Look!" 2 German sentries were climbing the ridge behind them, rifles slung, flashlights searching the sand. Lasher felt every hair rise on his neck. "We hold," he whispered, "no matter what." The Commandos froze mid-motion. The Germans' like passed within 4 meters of the SAS column, so close that Lasher saw dust motes drifting through the beam. The Germans muttered to each other. One kicked the sand. Another pointed toward the burning airfield, shrugging. Then they moved on. Only once the lights vanished did Price signal again. A narrow detour, barely a foot of safe ground. They slid through it like shadows. 03:22, midpoint. The flares died. Darkness returned. But the danger grew worse. German patrols were now sweeping the perimeter with dogs. Radio chatter crackled across the desert floor. Orders barked, "Check the minefield! Look for footprints! They must still be out there!" Lasher's team continued their deadly rallet. Step, pause, slide, breathe. The minefield seemed to stretch for miles. Every muscle burned. Every heartbeat felt like it might set off a mine. Then, a dog barked, not distant, close, too close. The men dropped flat, becoming part of the sand. Lasher pressed his cheek to the cold ground. He heard the dog sniffing, pawing, the handler muttering threats. "Ruhig, sucht weiter. Quiet, keep searching." Price didn't move, not even his eyes. He was face to face with a glass mine, its faint metal trigger exposed inches from his nose.
The dog sniffed the air, tensed, growled. A gunshot cracked from the airfield. A German officer shouting. The dog turned sharply, distracted, and the handler dragged it away. The commando line stayed frozen for 30 more seconds. Then Lasher whispered, "Move." 0331. Final stretch. They saw the ridge. Distant. Dark. Safety. Only 20 meters left. Price probed the sand rapidly now, gliding forward. His arms shook from tension. His fingers bled, but he kept going. 10 meters. 8. 5. A German flare burst overhead, lighting the minefield in harsh blue-white light. Price froze. The whole team did. They lay exposed, 12 figures carved into the sand. For 1 second, anyone looking directly at the minefield would see them. But the Germans weren't looking down. They were staring at the inferno still devouring their aircraft, at the flames rising hundreds of feet high, at the chaos tearing their airfield apart. The flare burned out, and in the darkness that followed, Price whispered, "Last steps." Lasher nodded. Home. One by one, they cleared the final line of mines, slipped behind the ridge, and disappeared into the desert night. By the time German patrols finally searched the minefield, they found only untouched sand, no footprints, no breaching tools, no broken wires. Nothing. The SAS had moved so silently, so precisely, that one German officer later wrote in his report, "They passed through the minefields like ghosts. They came from the sand itself." But the mission wasn't over. Not yet. The Commandos still had to make it back to their rendezvous point, and the Germans were sending half their desert garrison to stop them.
The desert closed behind them. September 17th, 1942, 0344 a.m., south of Sidi Hanish, deep desert. The ridge at their backs offered only momentary comfort. Beyond it stretched miles of open sand, a wasteland lit by flames still licking the sky behind them. The airfield burned like a torch, sending black smoke spiraling toward the stars. And in that hellish glow, German trucks poured out onto the flats, headlights off, engines snarling like hunting wolves. The SAS had minutes, maybe less. Captain Lasher pushed forward, keeping low. On me, spread intervals, no straight lines, move like the wind cuts you. The Commandos fanned across the dunes, breaking patterns, leaving footprints that the desert wind would erase within minutes. Hook Dennett jogged beside Lasher, breath shallow. "They'll search the minefield for hours. They won't believe we crossed it." Lasher gave a tight smile. "That's why they'll miss the obvious." "And that is," Hook asked, "that ghosts don't leave paths, and we walked like ghosts." 0351 a.m., the dune troughs. The Commandos slid into the natural channels formed by wind erosion. These troughs were narrow, winding rivers of shadow, deep enough to hide them from any German scouting silhouettes, but treacherous underfoot. Private Tommy Orford stumbled as his boot caught a patch of loose shale. Price grabbed his elbow, steadying him. "Careful. You fall here, you stay here," Price whispered. Behind them, German voices carried faintly across the night. "Spread out! Search the valley! They must be hiding among the dunes." A flare burst overhead, lighting the desert in ghostly white. The Commandos flattened instantly, their bodies blending into the trough walls. The flare burned, crackled, faded. Then darkness returned. They rose as one, silent. precise, deadly. 03:59 a.m. German patrol, 600 yards behind. Major Reinhardt, the same one who had hunted Pyotr Lewandowski in a different part of the war, now stood atop a staff car trunk, binoculars pressed against his face. He scanned the dunes. Nothing. Not even footprints. His lieutenant approached. "Minefield is intact, Herr Major. No breaches. They couldn't have passed through it." Reinhardt lowered the binoculars slowly. "That," he said, pointing toward the burning airfield, "proves they did." A pause. "But how?" the lieutenant asked. "With skill or with madness," Reinhardt muttered. He didn't know it yet, but the SAS had created a new kind of terror. One where the enemy believes you can walk through death without dying. 04:07 a.m. The final stretch. Lasher checked his compass under a cloth to block reflections. The wind had shifted south. Their rendezvous point, a dry wadi known only from outdated Italian maps, lay beyond a rocky ridge half a mile ahead. Beddoes joined him. "Any sign of Davidson?" Lasher scanned quickly. Davidson, the radio man, emerged at the rear with the portable transmitter strapped to his back. "I'm here," he whispered. "Still breathing." "Good," Lasher replied. "We'll need you awake." 04:14 a.m. German flare plane. A drone filled the sky, slow, lumbering, menacing. A German Fieseler Storch scout plane dropping illumination flares across the desert. Price cursed under his breath. That's new. "Action on flare," Lasher barked. They all threw themselves onto the sand again, spreading out to avoid clustered shadows. The flare above them burst, crackled, faded. Then darkness returned. They rose as one. Silent, precise, deadly. 04:22 a.m. Dry wadi, blue lamp. The ground dipped suddenly into a narrow ravine, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Lasher slid down first, landing softly on the cool sand. He signaled the all clear. The team gathered silently in the ravine. Hook dropped his satchel and let out a shaky breath. "Last time I walked through a German minefield," he muttered. Price snorted. "Next time we can take turns." Lasher scanned the mouth of the ravine. Two figures approached, fast, low, moving with perfect discipline. Not Germans. Their allies. LRDG. The long-range desert group, the desert's original ghosts, greeting their younger cousins. Sergeant Marcus Foyle of the LRDG raised a hand. "Thought you got yourselves blown to the moon," he whispered. Lasher shook his head. "Not tonight." Foyle grinned. "We brought drinks and engines." Behind him, 3 Chevrolet trucks idled quietly, their camouflage nets shimmering in the faint pre-dawn light. "Get in," Foyle said. "The sun's rising and Jerry's not sleeping tonight." The SAS climbed aboard. Exhaust rattled softly. Sand churned behind the tires. And just like that, the ghosts that had walked through mines disappeared back into the desert. Hours later, when German engineers swept the minefield, they found every device intact. No tampering, no footprints, no tools, nothing. Reports described the infiltrators as unseen, unheard, untouchable, like spirits moving across the sand.